Thanks, Laura. Thank you so much. Very gracious, thank you. Thank you all for coming out to hear me talk tonight. You have to bear with me. I'm not the most gifted speaker. I'm a great storyteller, but speaking, these guys, I highly recommend you hook up with the Columbus Web Group because they, as Kevin said, they really do coach you through the public speaking process. It's not as intense as Toastmasters, but you really get from, hey, I know you. They really help you with like your PowerPoint presentation or your dialogue and whatnot, projection, everything. So it's a really great experience. And I also appreciate their community involvement. Kevin Mack and Laura, Brian Vogel, and Sean Duran. They're just great people. It's strobing. Okay. So again, my name's Jeff Breece. It's my Twitter handle up there. I'm a little bit blind, so I'm reading from my notes here. About me, very loudly. I am a national patient champion for the American Heart Association first. Secondarily, I am a volunteer moderator for the American Heart Association Support Network. I am currently a solution architect at Nationwide, like Laura said, and I just made that switch about a month ago. I had been with Cardinal for about 3 years before that, and you're going to hear about all these time hops through my career tonight because I'm going to be presenting some very specific tools I'd like to leave you with. I also have a husband named Eddie. I've been with him for 25 years now. And we've got 3 cats. I watch a lot of horror movies, and I'm now a vegetarian. So there you go. Too much information. They're actually really lucky cats. Okay, tonight's agenda. Again, what I'm going to do with my storytelling technique, which looks better on paper than hearing it from my mouth, trust me. We're going to cover 3 chapters of my career, and most of it's been in the tech industry. I've been a programmer, I've been a web developer, so I can relate to all of you. And I know all of you aren't developers, some of you are designers, some of you are possibly project managers, some of you may be into startups. But one thing we all have in common is creativity. And the 3 chapters of my career, I've picked up 3 distinct techniques to kind of either navigate through it or I found my passion in the first part of it for storytelling. The second part of it, I found something that really saved my neck when I really needed it. And the third chapter, I fell down and I had to pick myself back up. And that's the mindfulness part of the conversation that we'll be having tonight. So again, storytelling. Active listening is the second technique that we'll be covering tonight. And then mindfulness. A few of you sent in some awesome questions, and I'll have to turn my back on you for a moment to read them. But the first question we're going to cover tonight is, how can I work and collaborate more effectively and empathetically with my coworkers, neighbors, and my team? And my answer to that would be, just be present with them. Don't be distracted. Give that person 100% of your focus. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, just be real. And that is going to naturally give you the ability to be empathetic with that person because you're actually listening to them. You're not actually distracted looking at something else. Second question I'd like to cover would be, how do I know that I'm on the right mindfulness track? And for me, that's easy because I knew I was on the wrong track for a long time, especially in the second chapter of my career. I was probably the most mindless person you have met in your life. I was very focused on whatever job was happening, and there were like 10 to 20 different jobs that were happening at any given time. And so I was extremely distracted, but highly functional, but unhappy. So you're gonna know when you're on the right mindfulness track in your heart. Because if you feel like you're in the right place, or if you feel you're like in the wrong place, listen to that. That's gonna tell you where you're supposed to be, or where you're not supposed to be, in my case. So I'm going to start the talk off with an abstract, this is kind of like an out of sequence memory, but it was the best career advice I had ever gotten in my life. And I had been in the second chapter of my career for many years. I just kind of stayed put for a long time. So I was going to San Francisco out of the blue. This company called me. I became what's called a SharePoint developer. It's a framework, and I'll get into this more later on. It's a software package, and it became my area of expertise. So I got a call from this company out in San Francisco. Actually, it was a nonprofit organization, really teeny tiny organization funded by Bill and Melinda Gates. And they wanted a SharePoint developer to lead them to where they needed to go as far as their agenda, where they were giving software packages to third world countries who would submit a request, or a grant rather. And it was a really awesome experience. I got the job offer, and I just couldn't afford to move myself and my family from Texas. I was living in Dallas at the time, unfortunately, but everything about the city, everything about the young people at this nonprofit organization, their mission, it was incredible. I just couldn't accept it. But on the flight back, so I'm sitting next to a gentleman and his wife on the flight back, and they were just the coolest people. So he was the CEO of a home to Alex's company, oddly enough, and that came into play for Eddie and I later on down the road. But we were talking just about business and what's going on, what we're sharing our lives and whatnot. And he told me to repot yourself every 3 years. And I had to think about that for a while. So I was like looking back on my life, you know, as we departed and I was actually home, I'm like, okay, So up until like the second chapter of my career, the first chapter of it, I repotted myself probably every 2 years. And I was growing leaps and bounds and taking on different challenges as I had planned those. But the second one, I got kind of comfortable, and I kind of like started climbing the ladder. And looking back on that advice when I was thinking about it, I realized then that I needed to repot myself. It was time to move on. Okay, so this is a little time jump, the first time jump that we're going to take tonight. This is the first part of my career. And again, I'm using the mechanism of storytelling through this presentation as kind of an example of how I would do it. Of course, naturally, I'm in a meeting room, or I'm with my husband, or with Caitlin and Thomas, and we're talking about something, and I'll do 10-minute storytelling or 2-minute storytelling. Again, a presentation for me, that's a bit of a jump. So I'm not saying to use the storytelling technique for long hours or an hour worth of storytelling. That's a kind of a jump. But what you want to do is to tell your story with a little bit of passion. So without further ado, we're taking a jump back. So what I did was when I was in my early 20s, I dropped out of OSU. I was studying forestry because I felt like I wanted to save the world. When I got there in my 4th year, I realized that I'm not going to save the world, and I really don't like doing this. So I actually got a call from a wine shop just because a friend of mine had hooked us up, and I ended up managing the wine shop for 5 years. During that time period, I started doing the sommelier track and really getting geeky for the first time in my life. And it was really nerdy and very fun. So I was talking to one of our wine reps who would come in every week, and we were having a glass of wine because they would sample things with you, and that's how you educated yourself about the flavors and the qualities of various products. And I asked him, like, how did you become a wine rep? Like, how did you get the awesome job of like taking a sample bag and just rolling around the city, going to restaurants and wine shops and whatnot? And he told me that, okay, what you need to do is you need to wait tables. I hate waiting tables. Okay, and then you need to actually go work for a private club. Then you need to go work for a wholesaler like I do. And if you're really good, you can become a broker. And I was like, that sounds like a really awesome plan. So I adopted it, and that was my first career plan. And those were a few of my first repotting experiences, so to speak. Of course, I didn't have that advice at that point, but it just kind of came naturally. The thing is that through this time period, I learned how to tell stories. I made, when you're selling wine, or like when you're selling a fine experience, or any type of web product, like something that you're really exclusively, selling, something that is really unique, like a startup, you've got to be passionate about it. And the nerdiness talk again, nerdiness is nerdiness. So like if you're a CSS geek, and you're really jazzed up about a framework or a way to do something, or if you're a back-end developer, like one of my friends and former coworkers from Cardinal Solutions named Greg. Oh my God. So this guy is amazing. So, and really frustrating sometimes. But he's not a perfectionist, but he's got like a philosophical way of looking at code. And so one time I went through a code review with him, which I will never, ever, ever forget. It lasted for 6 hours. And we talked about naming conventions of variables. And like, my variable names are usually contextual, but his are like deeply philosophically structured. Drove me nuts. It was really crazy. And he's a nerd. He was really, that was his thing. That was the sommelier thing for him. Like, there's just nothing like it. But my point is that nerdiness in an object-oriented world inherits from excitement. And that's the thing that you need to actually carry into your stories when you tell them. Okay, yes. So there's an article in the Harvard Business Review, and I've already tweeted out the blog post that I wrote that is kind of the supporting material for this talk. And it's on the Columbus Web Group chain in their Twitter feed. And there's a link to this article. It's a Harvard Business Review article on how to tell an effective story, which is, in my opinion, really kind of perfect. So start with a message. Like, what do you want to tell somebody about? If I'm going to tell somebody about a bottle of Cabernet that came from Sonoma County and it was grown by a guy named Chuck, and his wife always bakes bread, and they have that with olive oil that they've grown olives from on their farm. I can tell a story about that, meeting these people, shaking their hands, actually having dinner with these people, and listening to the music they would like. That's the kind of stuff that I can actually make personal. I experienced it. Here's the bottle of wine that I'm actually trying to sell you, or here's the startup product that I'm trying to sell somebody. Make it personal. Mine your own experiences, and again, this is the personal aspect of it. Everything that you experience that's applicable to your story, mine that. That's rich stuff. That's really going to make your delivery a lot more powerful, because that's what's going to connect you with the person that you're talking to. Yeah, don't make yourself into a hero. I usually make myself into an anti-hero when I write, but it's not about me. It's not, again, like tonight's talk is all about me, but it's not about me. It's these things that I pulled away from these experiences, right? So don't make yourself the hero. The idea is the hero in your story that you're telling. Highlight a struggle. People relate to struggles. They want to know how you overcame something, and we'll cover one of my big struggles in the third part of this topic, where I learned mindfulness and how I've used it to overcome that struggle. Keep it simple, of course. I mean, it's a universal theme. It applies to everything. Just don't make it complicated. Get to the meat of what you want to say, and say it and be done, and let it go. Oh yeah, okay. This is the point in time. So this is me and two of my favorite colleagues back in the day. We worked for a company called Bauer & Foss, and they were a wine distributorship. This is where I actually finally landed after working for the restaurants, waiting tables, which I didn't want to do, but it actually was kind of fun. Working for a private club, which was really stodgy, but it was kind of fun. And then I ended up finally at a wine distributorship as a sales rep, external, selling to restaurants and wine shops. And it was super fun. But this one was the Google of its day. Not the big Google that we know now, but the baby Google. The ones that had the really cool idea and they actually executed it super well. And this was in a world of, well, think of Microsoft circa like 20 years ago when they were kind of evil. This was in a world of Microsofts, like really big wine distributors who sold box wine or really strangely flavored like peach Chardonnays, I think. Just disgusting things. But lots of people like it, right? So they made a lot of money, we made very little money, but we had stuff that was exclusive, like just small production wineries that would make maybe like 100 cases a year for the whole entire world. And so when I walked into a restaurant as a salesperson, they would beat me up to get the stuff that I got that I didn't have because it was so rare. So I would have to form they would have to form a relationship with me because I had the really good stuff. And it was super fun. And how I learned how to tell those stories was what Bauer and Foss did for us was they would send us out to wine country every 3 years. And we would meet with and stay with and eat with and listen to music from these people who own the wineries, the people who grow the grapes. And those were the connections that I made. And some of these people are still my friends. That's like 20 some years ago. And that is the company that taught me how to actually tell stories. That's the experience that I got. They actually made me the person that I am today, effectively. And there was one night with, I'm going to say their names, Roxanne and Wade. Wade was a certified sommelier, is a certified sommelier. He lives in Maine now, and Roxanne now lives in Columbus. She was my manager at the time. We, at the end of that particular trip, ended up going to Sonoma County. Sonoma and Carneros are my favorite areas, by the way, because they're kind of cooler. They're not as hot as Napa. They're not as literally hot as Napa, popular anyway. But we went to a small, tiny little hole-in-the-wall restaurant, which is par for the course in Sonoma. And we ended up having this really risky dinner because we had, I know Wade talked about it for like all night long. We had champagne with ossobuco. And ossobuco is, and again, I'm a vegetarian now for other reasons which we'll cover in a moment, but it's amazing. It's a bone marrow served to you in bone, and it's just the most amazing decadent dish in the world. Super fatty, just delicious. And with champagne, which is typically acidic and yeasty, it's just a booming combination. It really is great. But we talked about the trip, we talked about our lives, we became lifelong friends over that table. Questions? You can't tell from the C that I botched that, sorry. My bad. Sorry, Kevin. The first question, or the third question rather, is what are some tips for working with different working styles of people? So everybody's an individual. Everybody in this room has a different background than me, of course, from each other and whatnot. And the thing is we've covered storytelling at this point, and we're going to move into active listening in a moment. But the thing that I think that you want to think about when working with different styles of people is to find a way to relate what you want to say to them, and also take a moment and pause, and don't just respond when they talk. Listen with the same investment that you hope that they have in you. Give them the chance to tell you their reaction to what you're saying and let them be themselves. Second question would be, how about working with coworkers who want to build things differently? Yeah, that is absolutely great. I think how I feel about that is if everybody thought the same way, there would be no innovation at all. There would be no inventions, there'd be no leaps forward, there'd be no development as we know it today. So embrace working with different styles. You've got, again, to find the way to talk to them, to listen to them, and then to blend your ideas together and hopefully come up with something new. And that's the whole goal, is to come up with something that is that killer idea that's going to be a technological advancement or a different way of like working with Greg, and he's teaching me his philosophical way of naming variables. I did take away some information from that, and I do think about variables more. Like he changed how I perceive things just a little bit. And if you get that away from working with other people with different styles, that's a win. Aha. So now to active listening. So Bauer and Foss kind of bit the dust in the year 2000 when everybody was selling software patches and whatnot. There was a really large company called Glazers, and they're still around, and they're a great company. Well, actually, no. Glazers just sold to Southern, so they're now known as Southern Glazers. But the path of growth is really cool here. So Glazers saw Bauer and Foss as a jewel that they wanted in their crown because they sold box wines and peach-flavored Chardonnays. Just was what they did, and they sold a lot of money, they sold a lot of that wine, and they were, I think, $4 billion a year in sales, and about the third largest organization in the world. Anyway, so I had been playing with Red Hat 5 at the time, so it was like 1996, 1997, whatnot, And much to husband Eddie's chagrin, I kind of nerded out on computers as a hobby. I never completed my degree, my forestry degree. I didn't have a computer science degree, but I had a natural inclination to technology. And so I had 4 Pentium 1 or 2 computers in our living room and drove them nuts. But I set up a web server, a database server, and an email server, and a DNS server. And I self-taught myself technology. After I had all that set up, I started teaching myself web technology. So HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And of course, it's the 90s, so it's really basic, and it's not very pretty. But it gave me a foundation, a technological foundation, then to make a jump to Java, object-oriented languages like Java, and .NET later on down the road. So anyway, what happened with that was I didn't really feel like I could spiritually sell peach-flavored Chardonnay, so they knew that I worked with computers, and then they hired me, Glazers hired me, to help them do the system conversion of Bauer & Foss, which was a SCO Unix box. And I was able to pull the data, model it, transform it, do the ETL without you actually being an ETL person, and give them the data from Bauer & Foss that actually helped them to do the system conversion later on down the road. That landed me a job as a state of Ohio, because they covered 13 states, so I covered the state of Ohio. I did web development internally for the sales, marketing, and trade development teams. And I stayed there for a few years. Once I had my technological wind in my lungs, I started looking at other products. Like there was an open source document management system called Knowledge Tree at the time. It's probably long since gone, but I implemented that for our office, and it transformed the way that all of our salespeople work with each other. I, as a salesperson, we used to have like bags worth of point of sale material. And also in the back of our car, we had boxes, milk crates worth of, paraphernalia, paper, catalogs, everything like that, right? With this system, they were actually able to dial in and get documents from the document management system. That was great. I got the biggest raise of my life during that year too. And what was interesting was the president of our state, even with all that, pulled me into his office for the review because I reported to him. He's like, I don't know how you do it or what you do, but you make things better here. I was like, great, awesome, thanks, cool. It was really flattering. But yeah, so that actually put me on the radar for the Dallas office, which was the corporate office for Glazers. And they reached out to me to offer me a job. So I talked to Eddie about it. Didn't really jive with the idea of moving to Dallas, but we told each other one night, we'll regret it if we don't take a risk and make a leap and jump. And we did. So we packed up our cats, 2 of them at the time, and we moved to Dallas, downtown, and it was a completely different experience. When I got there, it was the most challenging period of my life, and I didn't even realize what was going to happen within the year or 2 years that was about to unfold in front of me. So again, my background, self-taught, sequential programming, 90s, really scary. And then I was faced with learning Java, object-oriented programming principles, and then of course the Spring framework, which is kind of an enterprise flavor du jour of a way of programming. Even Nationwide uses it, and it's one of their standards, right? So it's kind of really old school, but it's really solid. So I had to learn how to do this stuff and really fast. So within 2 months, I picked up a functional knowledge of Java, and I did have a class in this before, so I wasn't like totally in the dark with it. But the object-oriented part of it was a really bit of a struggle for me. So I did that for a year, and I was pretty successful with it. And then they bought a product called SharePoint, which I alluded to earlier. It's an enterprise collaboration platform. Anybody heard of WordPress here? Okay, it's not like WordPress at all, but think, psych. Think of WordPress as a package, and think of SharePoint as a package that you can do all sorts of stuff with. That's kind of the same idea, right? Only it's bigger and it's Microsoft, and you can save the world with it. Or rule the world with it, rather. So I chose to take the job that they offered me after that to shepherd Glazer's move into the SharePoint world and the .NET world, which is a big jump for them. Much at the same time, though, they were converting from SAP, or no, I'm sorry, the AS400 platform, the I-Series platform, which was a custom system that had very green screen, actually all green screen, very 1970s, and also Lotus Notes. So we were moving from old technologies to arguably old technologies too, but with the exception of Outlook, we moved from Lotus Notes to Outlook. And part of my job was to help that conversion from Lotus Notes into SharePoint applications, kind of modernize it a little bit and get rid of the attrition. And then when they were doing the SAP conversion, they discovered that there were systems in SAP that weren't supported that they needed. Since SAP was, again, built in the 1970s, and it was a manufacturing package that they were modeling to distribution. So it came with a lot of challenges. And the incentive system, a way to actually pay sales reps for, hey, if you sell 5 cases of this stuff, I'm going to give you $10. And that happens a lot, and that's part of your income as a sales rep in the wine business. So that system didn't exist in SAP, so they elected to do this in SharePoint. And I said, yeah, sure, we'll do it, it's cool. Because at that point, I became a lead developer there in the SharePoint department, which was, it was mine. And we had about 5 people with me now. So it was a really small, tiny development team, but it was our team. So during that year, with all of this cultural change happening at Glazers, and I'm sure anybody been through mergers or worked with companies who've gone through mergers? It's not fun usually. People are angry, people are afraid. It's just, people are gonna lose their jobs even though they tell you nothing's gonna change. It's just part of life. So that's what was all going on there, and people were really unhappy. And with the new technologies also that they weren't used to, they were very resistant to it. So there was a point where I was just banging my head against the wall when I'm talking to project managers who were really kind of like, no, this is not a good technology. They were just really fighting it. Storytelling was not cutting it. It just wasn't working. I wasn't getting anywhere. So I had to learn how to do something different. So I went to the library, like the lady in Harry Potter. I went to the library. And I picked up books on negotiation. One tiny little book called Conversationally Speaking, which I think I gave you a copy of. You've got my copy. It's like this skinny, and it had a whole bunch of techniques in it for like talking with difficult people, basically. But one of them was active listening, and it's the easiest one to pick up. But a little bit more about the incentive system that we built. Now, I architected. That's my desk at the time, and that's my Bible. Not my Bible. I don't have a Bible, but that's my big notebook, which I still have. I remember going to a bunch of, probably 7 years in a row, while I lived in Dallas, different Microsoft tech conferences, which were huge at the time. It was before they formed Ignite. And it was all about their whole entire technology stack. I remember going into one guy's presentation where he said, you can do everything with SharePoint. The trick is not to. And that goes true for all software packages. And think of them as tools. There's always a right tool for the job. And not one tool can handle everything, right? Okay, I should have remembered that when I was architecting this, because I could have had an interesting conversation with the vice president of software saying, we might not want to do this, but it didn't register for me. So we were starting to build the incentive system, and it followed the composite application framework, pattern rather. And anybody know what mashups are? Back in the early part of the 2000s, right? Where you're just putting a bunch of technologies together and you're making a system out of them of some type. That's what a composite application is. And in SharePoint, we leveraged what's called timer jobs, basically automation pieces, workflow pieces, again, automation pieces, InfoPath forms, which was it's a technology that's being deprecated by Microsoft that allows like business users to make really cool forms, only they kind of suck. And it was bad. It was really bad, but it gave you a way to use code behind with a web form and whatnot, and then of course the SharePoint framework itself with SQL Server. So we patched up this Frankenstein thing, and it followed Microsoft's best practices. Like if you want to build the incentive system, or if you want to build a time-off system, or if you want to build whatever system, use the composite application pattern, because you can, sell puppies and make them happy. It's just a really good thing. So we launched it. We built it, we launched it. We did a soft launch to Louisiana, which is another one of our states. And everything was a smashing success. People were, I think we paid out like maybe $2 million to individual people through interfacing with HR, ASAP. It was a really cool system. And it worked really well for Louisiana. But then when we launched it a few months later to the largest percentage of Glazer's business, which was Texas, biggest state in the nation. Wait, no, it's California. Texas just thinks that. Anyway, it was a catastrophic failure. I remember there was a lady, this is set up for the part of the story that I want to tell you. There was a lady I used to work with named Carol Hunter at Bower & Foss, and she was a uber hippie. Like, she was great. Loved her. I mean, she was right out of the 60s. And when Glazers bought us, she came along with the company. And we all kind of fell off, except for like maybe 5 or 6 of us. Carol was given a laptop, and she looked at the tech guy who gave her a laptop and said, "I don't want this. This is corporate pollution." And so I kind of vibe well with that sentiment. So I keep work email off my phone. I don't take work email with me. I'll take my laptop home occasionally, but unless I'm on call and I actually have to be at work, I try to keep that separate in my life. It just feels better to me. But there was one particular morning when I went to work at Glazers, and I got into the office, and you could almost smell something was wrong. And so I went upstairs to my desk, and then, of course, I start reading the emails, and then I get emergency visits, and I find out just how badly the system had fallen apart. It was the worst. So I just, I could, before I even had the language for this, I had the experience of a physiological reaction to what I was hearing. I could feel a change in my body, and I just felt like crashing. So I had to leave the building for 10 minutes. So I walked around the building, the neighborhood a little bit, almost felt like crying, but I was the lead. So this is the system I architected, and I'll clean it up, my team will clean it up, and I'm gonna face the music for it. And there's a quote that, this is really, really pop culture, and kind of like 10 years ago pop culture, maybe 20. But there's a Star Trek New Generation or Next Generation, whatever they called it. I think it was in the Borg or something or other, where the captain of the Enterprise says something about if his heart had been a cannon, he would have shot it upon the whale and whatnot. That was me, because I could fix everything. That's when I was working on the incentive system with my team, and we built this thing. I knew there was a way to do it. There was a way to solve every problem. And that's kind of how I approached life back then. And it had its consequences. So the system collapsed. We cleaned everything up. Everything was great. We got actually accolades for actually cleaning it up. But I went to the vice president, and I'm like, this is my fault. So, and of course, she was gracious. Actually, she said, no, it's actually the framework's fault. And we pushed you to this direction to do this way. So it kind of actually ended up in a good place, and it was a huge learning experience. Not just about technology and what to do and don't do, but also like the scars that I took from that experience. So active listening again, because we're talking about the hostile environment at Glazers at the time, where they're very reticent to change, but they know they've got to change. Active listening, this technique that you can use, is super simple to implement and is powerful in meetings. So let's say that I've got a speaker, he feels that XYZ has the following values. And your response would be to wait for a minute, think about what that person said, or just take a couple of breaths, even if you've already made your decision, you've leapt to what you want to say. Because we kind of do that in meetings. We're like 7 or 8 of us, and I'm in meetings back to back these days as an architect over at Nationwide, and I see a lot of these practices where like, and they're interjecting and finishing each other's sentences and jumping all over each other like puppies. When in reality, just slow down. Listen to what the person says, take a few breaths, and then say something like this. Let me see if I understand you correctly. So you see that XYZ can do yada yada. This makes me think about ABC, which is my point. Can you tell me how you feel about the relationship between the two? What this does is he or she knows that you heard what they said because you didn't simply parrot their answer back. And that's the risk with this. When you do active listening, you're essentially repeating what they're saying, but always make sure that you put a personal spin on it. Repeat it, but let them know that you heard what they said. And then we all have our own agendas. We all have the things that we need to accomplish that management has given us to do, right? But what we need to do is find that compromise. Blend those two ideas. Put your idea on his or her radar and have a discussion about it. And that's where really good, productive things happen in business and in personal relationships. But that's it. That's active listening. And that was a technique that I picked up during one of the darkest periods of my career because I had to figure out a way to actually work with these people and get our agendas moving forward together. So more online questions. How can I spread mindfulness at my workplace? What I would say with that is just do it. There's a few people, again, with the next chapter that we're going to get into here in a second. So I almost died twice in 2015, and it was a really difficult time period. But what I discovered were what my Aunt Laura told me, that you're going to find some amazing gifts in life's challenges when it presents itself. One of the gifts was I found out that I have an anxiety disorder. I've had one all my life. So when I get compliments from my friends or coworkers, and I've gotten this repeatedly from people, it kind of makes me laugh a little bit because I'm a huge collection of crazy thoughts all the time. But I've been told multiple times that I don't know how you do it, nothing seems to faze you, you're always so relaxed. And how you spread mindfulness in the workplace is just be relaxed. Take time to take a breath. What are some tips on how to collaborate and some reminders on what not to do? Don't respond to respond. Listen and respond. Be present, put your phone down. The phone is not the problem. No technology is the problem. It's us that's the problem. We've got to think about the people that we're with. We've got to think about ourselves too, and really pay honor to each other. This leads into the mindfulness part of a conversation that we're going to have tonight. And this is the last story of 3. So this is the 3rd chapter of my career here. So I moved, So from Glazers, everything worked out really well. We parted on really great terms. I got a job offer from Cardinal Solutions, oddly enough. So I'm a alumni here of 3 years. And so I packed up my new 2 cats, because the other 2 died, and, and I don't blame them. It was rough. We moved back home. So I repotted myself again, and I was now a consultant, a technology consultant. Again, with SharePoint, but that was my area of expertise. And it was challenging. Again, like with the learning Java Spring thing, I had to learn a whole new business vertical of software sales and participate in that 6-month cycle. Everything, like you pick up a different client, that's the beauty of this kind of work, is that everything's different all the time, and it's really fun. And I approached it as very fun, and so I ended up working on 2, 3, 4, 5 clients at a time. There was another guy, actually, who's famous here, who works on like 10 clients at a time. And it can be really energetic. So it can be fun, but you don't have to do that. That was just the way that I chose to do it, because I was like, again, I can solve any problem. I can do anything, right? No. So with the workloads and my personal imbalance that I ended up finding myself within, because I was excited about everything, I alluded to this earlier. It was 2015, and it was April 2nd. I had a surprise heart attack. And it was without warning. I had no symptoms. My general practitioner doctor, my doctor, said after the fact that you're the last person I would expect to have a heart attack because your risk factors are like none. But again, I'm from an adoptive family, so you never know. And stress doesn't help, but at the same time, dealing with stress does not mean that you have to stop everything. You can keep going and you can be highly functional, but you've got to find a way to actually manage that stress. Of course, the heart attack picture, embarrassing, but that was a moment where I was in ER, and I think that was the moment where I found out that there's an enzyme called tropopin, and so you go in if you have chest pains or whatnot. I didn't have any like chest pain symptoms. I just had like a tightness in my chest from working out the night before. I thought I had sweat on my forehead, and I had this. If you hear about a sense of impending doom, it really does exist. Like, it was almost like that morning where I found out that the system failed at Glazer's, where it just everything felt crushing emotionally. That's what it felt like, and that's as painful as it got. But this picture is where I found out that my second tropopin test came back positive, and that something was in fact going on. So, yeah, so I came back here to Cardinal. I have guns a-blazing. I still hadn't recovered much from Dallas and what had happened. And I still had that Baron Foss independent streak in me. So I had to figure out how to kind of change my tune. And mindfulness really helped with that. I became a runner. I've run 4 half marathons now in the past 2 years. And I'm training for my first full marathon now. I became vegetarian also, just to help with the statistics of the future. And then with the mindfulness thing, I was raised Baptist and I became an atheist. I ran screaming out of my hometown of Marion from organized religion. So, and I respect people who do practice organized religion. I think they're awesome, but for me, it just wasn't. So when they approached me with the idea of taking mindfulness classes, meditation, I was like, oh, no, I can't do that. It's spiritual, no. And so I was like, okay, fine, I'll do it. If it's gonna help me survive, fine. And so I learned how to meditate over the next 6 months, and I'm still doing it today. And what I'd like to share with you again is the how part of it, like just a context on how to think about it if you don't practice it. Because once you learn how to do some of these tricks, you can just fire it up in your head silently in a meeting room. Like if a meeting's going wrong, go to your place for just 2 seconds and come back out of it, and you'll have benefits from it. The cloud meditation is an awesome one. I picked this up in like a child's book on meditation from the library, which it was just beautifully illustrated and really fun. And think of me when I'm sitting down and, okay, I'm gonna meditate, I don't like to meditate, and I'm gonna laugh at myself sitting on these pillows on the floor because this is ridiculous. And I shut my eyes and I'm thinking of like 1,000 things, right? And okay, I can't meditate. This is just not for me, right? Wrong. When you think about those thoughts that you think about, like the 1,000 thoughts when you're trying to meditate, your thoughts aren't you. I am not my thoughts. I'm the empty space in between the thoughts. And the whole practice of meditation is, okay, what's Kevin doing this weekend? Where's my cats? What do I need to name that variable? How many meetings do I have tomorrow? So on and so forth. Those are the kind of things that are going through your head. So what you want to do is like, happens here, goes there, spot. There's a spot of emptiness right there. That's the practice of meditation, where you're listening to yourself breathe, and we're going to talk about and do a breathing exercise here in a minute. That empty space, that one sliver of empty space, that's the practice of meditation. And you don't have to be a guru at all. You can suck at it for 2 years, but the more you do it, the more repetitive you are with it. It's like programming. There's patterns. You're reprogramming your brain, your physiological reaction to things, and trust me, when I'm having a panic attack, which I found out that, yay, I'm one of the lucky ones and I get those, there's a physiological response, a chemical response that your body's going through that you cannot control, but you can manage. Now the breathing technique that I use, there's several. And I'd like you to, this is not really hard at all, so it's really easy, so I want you all to do this. We're gonna inhale for 4, we're gonna hold it for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. And when you do that, for a count of 4, not 4 seconds. But so, okay, inhale, 4, exhale, or sorry, let's try that again. Psych. Told you I wasn't the best presenter. Sorry. Okay, so let's try this again. Inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just repeat that repeat that for 6 cycles in a meeting, and nobody's going to know you're doing it. But what that's going to do physiologically to you, it's going to lower your blood pressure. It's going to lower your heart rate. It's going to increase your attention, which is really good in meetings sometimes, especially when things are not going the right way. It helps you to come back to the present, and it helps you to actually be there with the people that you're talking with. So that's what mindfulness of the workplace to me means. If you want to, do some more research with Stephen Levine and Noah Levine's books, which I've got a stack of. They've got some things like forgiveness meditations and loving kindness meditations, and they're just really super awesome things. Not spiritual, but it helps you interface with the world better. So in summary, and we're coming to the close of this presentation now, and thank you for bearing with me for so long. My 3 biggest tools, of course, for my career are storytelling, active listening, and mindfulness, and they will help you in your business activities and your personal business activity or personal activities as well. But again, we're all different, so your tools are possibly going to be different, probably going to be different than mine. These are just my own tools I'm sharing with you, and they may help you as well. Find your guides, but keep your spark and enthusiasm. Like your story, build your stories, kindle your passions, kindle that excitement and keep it with you. If it goes out, relight it. It's not going to be out forever. And again, I'd like to think that we are the empty spaces between our thoughts. I really kind of took that to heart. And of course, I want to give a citation to where I stole the title for this presentation from. I saw this movie for the first time probably in the early 80s. And the movie, I think, was made in 1978 or 79, maybe a little bit earlier. It's a movie called Being There with Peter Sellers and Shirley MacLaine. And it's been called one of the most charming movies ever made. And I can't recommend you watch it enough. But the main character is, it was Forrest Gump that kind of liberally drew upon the character composition from this movie to build the character of Forrest Gump. So it's that kind of a person that you're actually watching a movie of. And in it, there are all these people around him who are making all sorts of decisions or judgments about who this person is and what this person's about. None of it affects him. So you go through this whole entire movie, and towards the end of it, he's lost a friend. The old man, who's the character in the movie, has died, and he's staying at his estate. And he's met the president, and he's a candidate to become the president now. And he's a Forrest Gump kind of person. But he's just walking along through his life, and you see him walk across the lawn, and then he's walking across this pond. And then all of a sudden he kind of stops. And and he takes his umbrella, and he bends down, and he pushes it into the water, and pulls it back up and looks at it, and was like, and just keeps on walking back to the mansion. And they close the movie with the line of, life is a state of mind. I think that's really, really powerful. And that's how I like to think about life in general. It's what we make it. Again, we are the empty spaces between our thoughts. So with that, we're going to close the presentation, go back to the Q&A slide, and open for Q&A. Exactly. Yep.
Is that one of your cat's names?
No, it should be though. Yes.
So you talked about active listening and how you're basically relaying everything back that the speaker is basically telling you. Now, I worked in customer service, and that's a big thing. If you want to have a positive defining moment, you have to have active listening.
Mm-hmm.
However, one of the obstacles I ran into is sometimes you could relay everything back to them, but that's not enough to have that positive defining moment.
Yeah.
So when you are talking to clients, how do you know how many times, or how do you know how much persistence you have to have with your active listening to get them to turn around?
That's a fantastic question, and that's why with my example I put in there, like, I want them to talk about my idea. So I want to, okay, yeah, I got your idea. Let me. If I heard you correctly, what I think you said was blah 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 blah, and here's what I have, and I want you to talk about what I have in relation to what you have, and then that conversation then goes into a totally different direction usually. But sometimes you're going to get somebody who's, a lot of times you're going to get somebody who's like single focused on what they want to say, and they're not going to listen to you. They're not actively listening. So that's when it's going to become a roadblock for you. So you need to try to get them to see, like, pry open their eyes a little bit somehow, and try to do it in a way that it's their words or their ideas that you're using it with. Use their idea as a lever, and then open their mind with it, which is tough.
So you mentioned briefly how you kind of try to physically separate yourself from your work when you go home. You leave your computer, you don't check your email.
Yep.
How do you go about mentally leaving your work at work?
It's tough sometimes. I'll be honest with you. I'll tell you how I do it, and how you do it's going to be different, right? But I will go for a run. I will take a nap. I will read something out of a book, or I'll distract myself with something else. Like after I had my heart attack and I didn't have the skills, I hadn't seen my therapist yet, I hadn't gone to meditation classes yet, I was a mess. But what I naturally latched onto was, this is common, once you have an event like this, oh my God, there's something right behind me. It's the weirdest feeling. It's like a panic attack all the time. So without any skills, what I did was, tomorrow morning, I'm going to have coffee. I'm going to make this coffee, so I would go and prepare my Chemex pot, set it out, fill the water pot, and after that time period, I felt a little bit more relaxed. So, and it might be like, for you, it might be a sport, or it might be some design book that you really, really enjoy, or maybe studying something. Just latch onto something until it lets go of you. We got time for 2 more questions.
Hello. Okay. So you mentioned when you repot yourself, it sounded like you weren't suggesting just changing roles. You were kind of suggesting changing companies.
Good question, and I wanted to be really careful about that. So for me, okay, Glazers was kind of a dead zone for me. There were 2 repots that happened while I was at Glazers. I worked at the state office here as a web developer, and then I went down to the corporate office and I became an enterprise developer, right? So there were 2 repottings within a 15-year period of that block of time. So I missed a lot of opportunity for personal growth. The first part of my career, I did a lot of hopping, right? Here at Cardinal Solutions, I stayed here for 3 years. And then an opportunity arose with Nationwide, which was architecture is completely new to me. So it was the perfect thing for me to jump into. But I had done architecture in the past. The thing is you don't have to jump companies to do this. Like if you're at Cardinal Solutions, it's awesome because every client could be a totally different repot. So you're going to be constantly challenged to learn things, to grow, to meet new people, to establish new relationships. Nationwide is also another good example of that, where you could move around all over the place and do totally different roles. Like I could actually go work in a front-end development, which scares the hell out of me. Personally, I don't have that mindset, but I really wish I did because it's very, very cool stuff. And I'm privileged to talk to you guys who are primarily creative people. So the answer to your question is you don't have to jump from company to company. You just have to find new challenges and take them on. But you can jump from company to company. Yes?
Thank you for just actually mentioning something about consulting, because that's basically, you almost asked my question. I'm gonna let you slide. But as a consultant, where I am gonna jump around, because I'll go, wherever the job takes me, then during your experiences, or what have you heard of that would help me to be mindful, to be there now? Like, nationwide term, be there now as I hop from consultant to consultant.
Did they say that?
They were saying that when I was at Nationwide.
Oh, wow, okay.
Be there now. So that stuck, because you have to be there now no matter where you
Yeah.
are. But when it comes to like mindfulness and you're going from client to like client, you're like, I just want to go home.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good set of questions. No, that's good. No. I'm going to try to hit all of them. You got to, again, from my perspective, I've got to know what my boundaries are. I've got to know what where I'm at emotionally, where I'm at mentally, right? And a lot of times when I'm thinking about that, I've actually got to go back to that space between the clouds again, and like, okay, I acknowledge that I'm thinking this, but I'm gonna let it go. I acknowledge that I think that I know that this is my agenda or what my boss wants me to do, but I'm gonna let it go. And I'm gonna talk to this person that I'm trying to interface with at my client site and let them, okay, let me have it. Talk to me about what's going on from your business perspective, my client being that person, right? Let me have everything that you've got. Tell me your history. Let me know who you are. In fact, this might be a good example. So I was still with Cardinal last year, and I had a client, a government client locally, and I don't have a really good history with government clients in general. Some of them have been super challenging, and I really didn't make friends, but that's okay. This government client, particularly downtown, he kind of befriended me, and he was totally not the kind of person that I would become a friend with, right? But he actually had a panic attack in front of me, and he wasn't actually able to control it. So I actually stayed with him for 2 hours and kind of coached him through how to have the panic attack and just let it go and whatnot. And I was like, if you need to go to Grant, because we were right down by there, I'll walk there with you, or we'll get the ER. Never ever take a walk to the ER if you think you're having a heart attack. Don't. So I made sure that we encouraged him not to do that. But my point is that I was present with him, and I let the purpose of why I was there, I let it go. And I was actually present with him as a human being. And I let him tell me what was going on, and we became friends as a result of it. And that was not my intention at all. It just kind of happened organically. And that's what I think you're looking for.
That's very good. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the questions. Thank you.